The United States and China is signaling success after 2 days of high-level trade talks.
U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says Washington and China have finalized the trade understanding reached last month in Geneva.
We just signed with China yesterday, right? Just signed with China. We have everybody. We're not going to make deals with everybody. Some we're just going to send them a letter, say thank you very much. You're going to pay 25, 35, 45%.
China.
China. China.
China.
China.
China.
China.
China.
China.
So, the US-China trade war? They're telling us it's over. That's the official story anyway. On June 27th, 2025, we all saw the pictures from London, officials celebrating a landmark agreement, promising an end to the brutal economic fight that has shaken the entire globe. The markets loved it, and for a moment, it felt like everyone could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But the document they were holding up for the cameras is a diversion. It's nothing more than a carefully crafted piece of political theater designed to hide the real agreement, the one that was written in secret, far from the press conferences. This secret pact trades the next decade of global power for a fleeting moment of peace. And tonight, we're exposing what they're not telling you. The real story isn't about the tariffs that are going away, it's about the terrifying concessions that were made on the resources and technologies that will define the future of our world. Section 1, the official story, and why it's a lie. For years, the headlines have been relentless, a back-and-forth tariff battle between the two biggest economies on the planet. It started with steel and aluminum, but it escalated fast. By early 2025, the whole thing reached a fever pitch. The US was hitting Chinese goods with taxes at a rate we haven't seen in modern history. China, of course, fired right back, targeting American farms and energy. The economic damage was immense. You couldn't ignore it. The World Bank was slashing its global growth forecasts for 2025, pointing the finger directly at the trade war. Here in the United States, the cost was passed right down to consumers. Some estimates suggested the tariffs were like a tax increase of nearly $1,200 per American household, while another analysis said the average household lost about $3,800 in purchasing power. The pressure was on. Something had to give. And just like that, we got the London Agreement, a breakthrough, a deal. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick announced it was all finalized. On paper, the framework looked simple. China would get critical materials flowing again, and in exchange, the U.S. would lift some of its countermeasures, like certain restrictions and export curbs. They sold it as a win-win. The war was over, stability was back. But this tidy little story conveniently skips over the most important questions. What exactly are these critical materials, and which restrictive measures did the United States just agree to cancel? That vague language wasn't an accident, it was intentional, because buried in those phrases are the two secret concessions at the heart of this deal. Concessions on rare earth minerals and advanced technology. And to get why that's so serious, you first have to understand the silent war that's been raging for years, completely out of the spotlight.
We were straightening out some of the points, having to do mostly with rare earth, magnets, and some other things. We've had a deal. We announced the deal.
Section 2, the rare earth chokehold. The first part of this secret deal is all about a group of 17 metals known as rare earth elements. Now, their name is a little misleading. They aren't actually that rare. What is rare is finding them in concentrations that are cheap enough to mine, and more importantly, having the massive industrial setup to process them. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable. For decades, one country has been playing the long game, strategically and ruthlessly dominating the entire sector. That country is China. As their former leader Deng Xiaoping famously said back in 1992, the Middle East has oil, China has rare earths. That wasn't a boast, it was a battle plan. And China has spent the last 30 years making it a reality. Today, China mines nearly 70% of the world's rare earths. But mining is just the first step. The real chokehold is in the processing, the complicated and often dirty work of turning raw ore into usable metals. And in that arena, China's control is basically absolute. They process an estimated 90% of the world's rare earths.
China is going to send more rare earths to the US, and in exchange, the US is going to roll back some of the export controls.
The United States, which used to be the world's leader, now has to export almost all of its raw rare earths to be processed somewhere else. And somewhere else almost always means China. These aren't just some obscure metals for industry, they are the secret sauce in almost every piece of advanced technology we use. They're in your smartphone, making the screen colors pop and the speakers vibrate. They're in the powerful, lightweight magnets that run electric vehicle motors and the giant turbines that generate wind power. Your average EV has between 1 and 2 kilograms of these elements inside. And most critically, they are the foundation of modern military tech. Precision-guided missiles, jet fighter engines, submarines, radar systems, all of them depend completely on a stable supply of rare earths. It's no exaggeration to say they are as critical to the 21st century as oil was to the 20th.
He goes on to say, we are getting a total of 55% tariffs. China is getting 10%. The relationship is excellent.
And China knows it. They've already shown they're willing to use this power as a weapon. Back in 2010, they briefly cut off rare earth exports to Japan over a territorial dispute, causing a panic that almost crippled Japan's auto industry. And just this year, in the spring of 2025, as the trade war got worse, China tightened its grip again, putting new export controls on these materials and sending shockwaves through global supply chains. This brings us to the secret concession. The public statement from China said Beijing will review and approve eligible applications for export in accordance with the law. This was spun as a solution. It's not. This language doesn't guarantee a free flow of anything. It formalizes China's role as the gatekeeper. It puts the United States and everyone else in the position of having to ask for permission. The deal didn't break China's chokehold, it made it official. The US got a promise of supply, but that supply now officially depends on the political goodwill of its main global rival. Section 3, the technology tollgate. So if giving China leverage over America's physical supply chain was the first secret concession, the second one might be even more important. This one is about the invisible world of export controls, the rules that decide who gets access to the most advanced technologies on Earth. For years, one of America's most powerful weapons wasn't a missile. It was its ability to restrict access to its tech. Through a web of regulations, the US government can stop foreign companies from buying American-made high-tech goods. We're not just talking about finished products. This includes the specialized software needed to design microchips, the sophisticated machines that make them, and even rules preventing US citizens from working for certain Chinese tech companies. The point of these controls was simple: slow down China's technological growth and keep cutting-edge US innovations out of the hands of its military, especially in areas like AI and supercomputing. And for a while, it seemed to be working. The controls were causing real problems for China's tech industry. But this tech blockade was also a major source of conflict. For Beijing, the goal has always been bigger than just assembling the world's gadgets. They want to design and build the brains inside them. Their whole Made in China 2025 plan is about becoming self-sufficient and, eventually, the world leader in high-tech. America's export controls were the single biggest roadblock to that dream. And here's the second secret concession. The public deal says the US will cancel restrictive measures. Just like the language on rare earths, it's deliberately vague. But those three words are the crown jewel of what China wanted. The US even signaled it might lift curbs on things like ethane, chip design software, and jet engines once the rare earth started flowing. Think about that trade-off. The United States is signaling it's willing to loosen its technological chokehold in exchange for China loosening its resource chokehold. The US gets the materials it needs for its F-35s and Teslas today. In exchange, China gets access to the tools and knowledge it needs to build its own versions tomorrow. Some might argue that these controls were only delaying the inevitable, that Chinese companies are already developing workarounds. But easing up now could hit the accelerator on that process. The US may have just secured its supply of the new oil, but it might have given away the blueprints for the new engines in the process. Section 4, Why It Matters, a New Covert War. So what happens when you put these two secret concessions together? you get a picture that's a lot more troubling than the simple story of the trade war is over. We were all told to focus on the tariffs on washing machines and soybeans, the old way of measuring trade. But while we were all distracted by that, the real negotiation was happening on a totally different level. It was a strategic bargain over the very foundations of 21st century power. On one side, the US secured a temporary and conditional supply of critical minerals. It was a move born of pure necessity. China's grip on rare earth processing is so tight that the US had no other good short-term option. Building a new, independent supply chain from the mine to the magnet takes decades and billions of dollars, not to mention navigating a mountain of environmental regulations. Faced with a crippling weakness, the US chose to deal. On the other side, China secured a potential off-ramp from the technology blockade that was hurting its long-term goals. It cemented its global power over critical resources, turning a practical monopoly into a formally recognized system where it gets to set the rules. So, who won? In the short term, you could say everybody. Markets are calm, the threat of more tariffs is gone, and we all feel some relief. But the long-term math is a lot darker. China traded a temporary resource squeeze for a long-term leap in technological power. The United States traded a powerful strategic weapon, its tech controls, for a short-term fix to its resource problem. This deal doesn't end the competition between the US and China. Not even close. It just moves the battlefield. The open war of tariffs is on pause. In its place, we're entering a new, much quieter phase of the conflict. This is a war that won't be fought with taxes, but with export licenses, intellectual property theft, and the silent, strategic fight to control the world's supply chains. The tariffs still lingering on things like steel are just a sideshow, a distraction from the much bigger fight that was just settled behind closed doors. The document signed in London wasn't a peace treaty, it was an armistice. It paused a costly and public economic war by striking a secret, lopsided bargain. A bargain where access to the metals that build our modern world was traded for access to the technologies that will create the next one. We were sold a story of relief. But the hidden truth is that this deal has fundamentally changed the game. The winner of this new, silent war won't be decided by the stock market or the price of stuff at the store. It will be decided by who controls the mines, who owns the processing plants, who designs the chips, and ultimately, who holds the keys to the future. The tariff war may be over, but the great power competition for the 21st century has just entered a new and far more critical phase. So what's your take? Did the United States make a necessary compromise to protect its vulnerable supply chains? Or was this a massive strategic mistake that will empower its biggest rival for decades? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want more investigations that uncover the real story behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.